And you're on the record.
Seeing at 6:03 p.m., I'd like to call the March 24th, 2020 special meeting of the Kenai City Council to order. If you're able, please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Gabriel,
Here.
Councilmember Peterkin,
Here.
Councilmember Glendenning, here. Councilmember Petty, Vice Mayor Malloy.
Here.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you, Glenyce. Councilmember Navarre,
Here.
Councilmember Naxtet,
Here.
Mayor Gabriel, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Next up, Council, we have agenda approval. We have no laydowns tonight. Councilmember Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel.
Our
Move
Vice
to
Mayor Malloy.
approve the- Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I'll move to approve the agenda. Request unanimous consent.
Second.
Moved and seconded, unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, the agenda is approved. Next up, we have item B, new business. Ordinance number 3115-2020, granting the city manager emergency powers, ratifying temporary leave for employees, and declaring an emergency. This time I'll entertain a motion for introduction. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Move to introduce ordinance number 3115-2020.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Gabriel,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterkin,
Yes.
Councilmember Glendenning,
Yes.
Councilmember Petty,
Yes,
Vice Mayor Malloy,
Yes.
Councilmember Navarre,
Yes.
Councilmember Naxtet.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We have a public, is there a public comment at this point? Do we call for public comment? Is there anybody from the public that'd like to comment on ordinance number 3115-2020? Do we have any online? Hearing none, seeing none. At this time, I'll entertain a motion for second reading. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Move for second reading of ordinance number 3115-2020.
Second.
Emergency. Unanimous consent.
Thank you. There was the main motion by Vice Mayor Malloy, second by Councilmember Glendenning. I believe I heard you say you requested unanimous consent. Is that correct, Councilmember or Vice Mayor Malloy?
Yes, Mayor Gabriel.
Okay, we're
Yes,
you're
Mayor
kind of
Gabriel.
we're getting a little feedback on your mic there, so unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection from the body for a motion for the second reading? Seeing none, the motion is approved. We now have before us ordinance number 3115-2020, granting the city manager emergency powers, ratifying temporary leave for employees, and declaring an emergency. This time I'll entertain a motion for adoption. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Move to enact ordinance number 1120.
Second.
Is somebody doing laundry in the background? I think we're hearing a washing machine go back and forth.
There's and Glenyce is not muted.
There we
I
go.
had muted my phone.
Yeah, I think we got. Yeah, we've got rid of that now.
Okay, go ahead, Vice Mayor Malloy.
Yes, okay. So did that get on the record that I'm move to enact it.
Yeah,
Is that motion up?
yeah, I believe you made a motion to enact.
Yes.
I'll second. Henry?
And second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there anybody from the public that would like to speak to ordinance number 3115-2020? Hearing none, we'll move it back to council for discussion. Vice Mayor Malloy, I believe you have an amendment you'd like to forward.
Yes. First of all, I want to say that I do support the ordinance, and I appreciate the legal and city manager bringing it forward. The amendment that I have in consideration for council with adding an additional whereas that would be a supporting rationale. Here, it's kind of a long one, but the gist of it is that, as you know, our previous meeting talked about how the emergency declaration had initiated his ability to start implementing the emergency operations that we have, and told us about incident management team, that he had assembled and who was part of that.
Mayor Gabriel,
Yeah.
point of order. Could he just make the amendment, we could second it, and then he can explain it?
Yes. Yeah. Could you go ahead and
Yep. Sure, that would be fine. So if you would look at page 2 of the ordinance, what I'm proposing to do is to add a new fourth whereas. So, and it would be whereas the city manager's disaster emergency declaration initiated implementation of the city's emergency operations plan, but the current plan does not provide the city manager with sufficient authority to take emergency actions that may be necessary to protect the critical functions of the city, the health and safety of city employees and the public in a disaster involving potential transmission of a disease, and.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Malloy. Have we got a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Was everybody able to hear and understand the proposed amendment? I guess if you weren't or you want to repeat it, please say so now.
Can I have
I'd
that
like to hear it
repeated, please?
Councilmember Petty.
Yes, I was only catching about every third word, so if he would read it again, I would graciously appreciate that.
I
Happy
guess
to
the
do
point.
so.
Can you guys hear me a little bit better?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, if the Vice Mayor has no objection, I'll go ahead and read it.
That
So,
would be fine.
thank you. On page 2, to add a new fourth whereas, that would read as follows. Whereas the city manager's disaster emergency declaration initiated implementation of the city's emergency operations plan, but the current plan does not provide the city manager with sufficient authority to take emergency actions that may be necessary to protect the critical functions of the city, the health and safety of city employees, and the public in a disaster involving potential transmission of disease and comma. That is the motion. That's been moved and seconded. So did everybody hear that okay? If you don't understand it, let me know at this point.
I could hear it.
Okay,
This is Tim. I have a question.
very good. Go ahead, Tim.
If I read, and I could be wrong, I'm reading all this, and if we had another emergency, this thing would still be active. I like that idea. I'm just wondering if Bob's whereas kind of limits that until we do an ordinance of our own, you know, and change our charter. But as in, on that second page, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the authorization provided in this emergency ordinance is temporary in duration, lasting only during the state and local disaster declaration, only to be utilized in response to the declared emergency. But I guess I'd like to hear from the attorney. I don't have a problem with this. I just don't know. A whereas is just a statement of fact. I just don't know where we're going, or if there's going to be a new now therefore section.
Thank you. Mr. Bloom?
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, Councilmember Navarre. So Section 7 of the ordinance has a sunset date, and it provides that this authority given to the city manager will terminate when the city's disaster declaration terminates, so it's not permanent in nature. Once we get through this and we revisit our code, I think we'll look for a more permanent solution in our code to deal with future emergencies. But this only addresses the current state that we're in now.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion on the proposed amendment?
Just briefly,
go ahead.
Mayor Gabriel.
Yes, I believe that's Councilmember Naxted.
It wasn't Henry.
Oh, Councilmember Peterkin, maybe.
Yeah, I guess, is it appropriate to talk about the whole thing or just this amendment?
Just the amendment at this time.
Okay, I have something on the whole deal, so I'll hold back.
Okay, and Vice Mayor Malloy, I'll give you a bite at the apple here. It's your amendment.
Yeah, so the purpose is that, you know, to support the ordinance by referencing, you know, what we have discussed. And it's good for the public to know that the city does have a emergency operations plan. It's been implemented. It's in process, but we're taking this other action because it doesn't really address the tools that the city manager needs in a situation involving potential transmission of disease as a disaster in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Malloy. Is there any other discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Peterkin?
Yes.
Councilmember Glendenning?
Yes.
Councilmember Petty?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Malloy?
Yes.
Councilmember Navarre?
Yes.
Councilmember Naxtet?
Yes.
Mayor Gabriel?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Council, now we now have before us ordinance number 3115, 2020 as amended. Councilmember Peterkin.
Yeah, I just wanted to hear from Paul, the city manager, about the, it said something about assigning employees new duties or tasks possibly, and I'm okay with that. I was just kind of curious if there was any right now that he could think of to have an idea.
And I guess at this point, thank you, Councilmember Peterkin. I guess at this point we could have the Mr. Ostrander give us, a little overview and maybe, delve in a little bit deeper, maybe to answer some other questions some other council member may have. Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Councilmember Peterkin, so specifically to your question, one of the items that we've discussed actually now is cross-training between departments. One specific example is animal control. We're currently going to find several employees who are willing to train at the Animal Control Center to learn how to clean the shelter, take care of the animals. So in case we do have a shortage of personnel at the animal control, they would be able to transfer over there. So that's just one example of the possible transfer of employees. Another example would be Parks and Rec employees that could potentially help in the streets department if they have a CDL. So there's multiple potential opportunities for employees moving from department to department that would be operating outside of their job description. And we need that flexibility during this time, depending on if we have an uptick in cases here locally and we're required to quarantine folks and have to find employees from other departments that would be able to operate. Some of the other items that, you know, we've been discussing here is a way to work our way through this. One of the struggles that we're having is, you know, we've already provided for 2 weeks of temporary leave. We're discussing now the extension of that temporary leave to potentially 4 weeks. As you probably know, there's already a federal mandate that we require, or that we allow 2 weeks of sick leave for all employees. But along with that, we're looking at the possibility, if this thing extends for a period of time, that we could have employees that even with the provided 2 weeks of leave and even 2 more weeks of leave, those that have been with the city for a short period of time or for whatever reason don't have a lot of accrued annual leave, they could be running into a situation where they're out of leave. So we'd want the ability to extend, for example, the option of borrowing leave. Right now, borrowed leave is only for medical conditions, but we would allow potentially an extension for folks to be able to borrow leave. Also, donated leave right now is only for folks that are dealing with a medical condition. We would potentially extend that to other employees. Also, if we do have an employee that runs out of annual leave, is unable to borrow leave or get donated leave, providing an option that we don't currently provide, which is leave without pay, but allow the city to continue to pay their health care benefits. So it would be a modified leave without pay that we don't currently have on the books. These are all examples of things that we're considering and potentially are going to need to implement through this crisis. And, you know, this ordinance would allow us to take those actions without coming back to council each time. And Mr. Bloom might have some things to add to that. I don't know, but those are some examples, and I've got more if council would like to hear more examples of things that we may have to implement as we work through this.
Thank you, Mr. Ostrander. Is there any discussion on ordinance number 3115-2020 as amended?
I have a question.
Councilmember Glendenning.
Yes, thank you. A question for the city manager. I support everything that you're that you're doing, and how you outline the advancement of these eventualities. Just a question about the federal and perhaps state application of leave. I would suggest that if some of those were to come true and be available, it would be additive to what we're doing tonight. In other words, would be an addition to what we're doing tonight, rather than a zero-sum game. That would be my suggestion, and if things come true, we can deal with it later. But that would be my approach. Thank you.
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Councilmember Glendenning. If you're referring to some of the items that are in the stimulus package, such as additional pay from the federal government to pay for employees that are not going to be paid, I don't know what that legislation looks like right now, but there's a possibility that some of those funds could be used to pay employees that are no longer that run out of leave or are unable to get paid by the city. Again, I'm not familiar enough with the legislation to tell you for sure what that looks like now, but there is a possibility that would be additive to what the city is providing.
Yeah, I'm just trying to give an advance signal. Thank you.
Any other discussion from council on ordinance number 3115-2020?
I have, if nobody else has anything, I have a thought.
Councilmember Peterkin.
Why would we not pay our employees when they're at home throughout this whole thing if we've already budgeted and they're planning on paying them? I mean, maybe they could do some work at home, maybe not, but I don't think it's gonna we're already planning on paying the bill. I mean, and they're loyal employees. I would think we just pay them right through this, however long it takes.
Mr. Ostrander?
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, Councilmember Peterkin. So we're trying to find that perfect balance between making sure that I shouldn't say making sure, but finding the balance between keeping our employees whole, but also making sure that the taxpayer dollars are used for productive time by the employee. So we are trying to liberalize our ability to provide telework opportunities. But in regards to just continuing to pay the employees regardless of whether or not they're working, I think there is a limit to the amount of leave that we should provide. Certainly, private businesses are going to reach that limit themselves, even with help potentially from the federal government. So I do think that we need to be responsible, telling folks that they would go home for 2 or 3 months without providing any meaningful work for the city and paying them for that entire leave. I don't think is a good use of public taxpayer dollars. So again, we're trying to be as supportive of our employees as possible, but also trying to create an environment where those employees can continue to be productive for the money that we're paying them.
Is there any other discussion on ordinance number 3115-2020 as amended?
Yes, this is Clenice.
Yes, Councilmember Petty.
I agree with what city manager is saying about if there's productive work for our employees to do, if they're on the payroll, to implement that to the best of our ability so that we can be responsible to our city community, because private businesses do not have an unlimited amount of resources with which to continue to keep employees on. And are we looking into how our employees at the city can work productively in an alternative manner if they're not at their designated location?
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, Councilmember Petty. Yes, we are. What we've prepared for is if the governor provides a shelter-in mandate, which would require that all employees that are not in positions that support critical functions of the city be sent home. We've prepared a list of those employees. So they would be not allowed to report at work at that time. And again, that would only be if there's a mandate from the governor or potentially a mandate from the president would we go down that path. The intentions now are to keep people working here, trying to create a certain amount of normalcy in their lives and continuing to report to work as long as we can do it safely. But if we are forced to send those employees or not allow those folks to report to work, we are then looking for opportunities for telework. Now, I will tell you that not all employees, depending on the position, depending on what their role is with the city, not all of those employees would be eligible for telework. So there would be some employees that would not be able to report to work, would not have the opportunity to telework, and they would have to immediately begin using this temporary leave that we've allowed above and beyond what they've accrued, the annual leave that they've accrued during their time here with the city.
Thank you. Any other discussion on ordinance number 3115-2020 as amended? I do have a question of the city manager. Mr. Ostrander, I've heard that the borough doesn't have the authority to issue a declaration that would impact our home rule cities on the peninsula, Kenai, Soldotna. How would you view action that we would take that would, is there any sort of discussions with the borough to talk about a unified approach, or maybe even the city of Soldotna, regarding future decisions or more restrictions to limit the spread of this disease?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I haven't spoke with borough administration since last week. I did talk to Stephanie Queen at the city of Soldotna today about doing exactly that, about the possibility of the city managers, and if we did that, then we would attempt to bring in the borough as well, a unified front. If all the cities agreed that further restrictions were necessary, I don't think at this point that, based on the conversations I have had with borough administration, that they're necessarily aligned with that approach as far as further restrictions at the state level. But certainly, if there is consensus among the group, I think it would make total sense to contact the governor's office and see if we could do that. I actually reached out to Dr. Zink today, and I'm attempting to set up a teleconference with her, with all the city managers, to discuss with her kind of what her plans are, what she thinks the governor is going to be doing, and also answer a lot of the questions that I know the city managers have specifically to how we should be handling our employees. And as far as one of the difficulties is when we see evidence of COVID-19 or even workers that are sick in the workplace, how we should handle those absences, and particularly the return to work component is very difficult at this time to determine when those folks would come back. The CDC guidance is incomplete in some cases, so those are questions that we certainly want to ask of Dr. Zink. But I guess back to your original question, unified front, if the cities came together and decided that we felt that further restrictions were necessary to limit the spread of COVID-19, I think it would make sense to approach the governor's office with that.
Thank you, Mr. Ostrander. I was handed a note that a member of the public has called in. Would they like to testify, Ms. Hines?
Their mic is not coming unmuted.
Okay. If there's someone from the general public that would like to testify at this time, they're welcome to. They would just need to unmute their mic and state their name and address for if they're a resident or not for the city. So again, if somebody's listening online and wants to testify, please unmute and identify yourself. Okay.
Mayor Gabriel?
Yes.
Does this give Paul or our city manager like latitude to deal with any of our tenants or anything that are maybe having difficulty, or is that kind of not part of this?
What was that again, Councilmember Peterkin? I didn't quite catch that.
Well, I'm just wondering if this covered anything like dealing with like the airport tenants or anything, where they can't run their business, but we're charging them rent.
Mr. Ostrander.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Council Member Peterkin. In the case of the airport tenants, specifically the lounge and the restaurant, those are simple because both of those are based on a percent of gross sales. So since there wouldn't be any sales, there wouldn't be any charge there. As far as other changes, are you thinking anything beyond the airport?
Well, I didn't know, and I my brother owns a bar there, but I hadn't talked to him or anything. But I just thinking in general that we may have more situations like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think one of the other areas they were looking at, I'll let Mr. Ostrander speak to it, were issues with water, sewer. Mr. Ostrander?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Yeah, one of the things we have been talking about and that we would like to incorporate is that no penalties or interest on utility payments would be incurred for likely the next 2 to 3 months. And essentially what that would allow is if folks are having a difficult time paying for their utilities during this period, there wouldn't be any penalties or interest that would accrue. So that is one thing that this ordinance would authorize me to do without council approval.
Thank you. Anybody else that would like to speak to ordinance number 3115-2020. Okay, before we call,
Mayor,
go ahead.
real quick, is there plans to, are we gonna have a discussion point at our next meeting? Are you planning on, there seems to be a lot of questions from council, and we're gonna get questions from the public. Is there any discussion as far as kind of, answering our questions, then put them all on this ordinance, which we all agree with and needs to be implemented, for a number of reasons, but it doesn't necessarily answer all our questions, and I guess, I'd hate Paul to get inundated with a bunch of calls from every one of us when we could do it as a group.
Was there a question in there for the city manager, Councilmember Navarre? I didn't quite follow that.
You or the city manager, essentially I'm just asking, was there any discussion of kind of broadening the scope, or what, like Robert brought up some stuff, if somebody came to him with this, I believe we are giving them the authority to do lots of things at this point. I also have some concern. I want to make sure the employees are protected in that if they borrow leave or they, if it goes further, you know, and they take future leave, how much future leave can they take? I don't want them to not be for 5 years, no sick leave or whatever leave available to them for the when this thing's over, and then they got to work for 5 years with no break. I mean, there's some of those issues that I think can create problems. If they left early, what would be the liability? And then I don't want them to be jeopardized if there is stimulus money that pays them back, but not if they took sick leave or something. So how we go about it, sometimes, you know, I'm sure we'll find out what the stimulus package has and those type of things. But those are just some of my questions, but they don't all have to be answered today. But that's just some of I'm trying to understand what's going to transpire.
Thank you. Mr. Bloom.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Councilmember Navarre. So what this ordinance does is it gives the authority to the city manager to take emergency action. So if he's contemplating action that's not necessarily an emergency that, you know, we can deal with in a week or 2 weeks or at the next council meeting, this isn't giving him that authority to act when when it's not a time sensitive issue. So if we're talking about, you know, things that can be dealt with at the next council meeting or can wait 2 weeks until another council meeting, that's not the type of authority that's been given to him through this ordinance. The authority that you're giving to him through this ordinance is to take time-sensitive steps that may not be allowed for in code in order to respond to emergency when there's not time to get council together to act. So, you know, if we're talking about 5 years of leave, I think that's something that, you know, could come back to council and have time to do that.
You know, I think.
This is Henry. I got a question.
Yeah, Councilmember Naxad.
Yes, I agree with the ordinance as amended, and I'll have no problem with that. But rather than mandating, but I was wondering of the city manager reporting to the council of his actions taken, if that would be something that we might all receive from him on some kind of semi-regular basis, you know, every few days or something. I did this, and this. Would that be something we can expect?
Well, yeah, and I had a conversation with the city manager and the city attorney about that, you know, adjudicating, you know, some of our authority to administration to respond to, you know, time-sensitive actions that they need to take without them feeling like they're violating our code. And if you look at Section 3, the last sentence there, it says, when practical and reasonable, the city manager shall promptly notify the city council in writing of all emergency actions or directed pursuant to this ordinance. So, and that was one of the conversations, or part of the conversation we had, was that that the council does stay informed, particularly, not as a member, not as a forum to debate the decisions that he's going to make, but that we have an idea of where this is going, and I think that's clearly appropriate, that the body knows what's where things are going. I see Mr. Bloom's light on. Mr. Bloom.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. And Councilmember Nex said one other thing that we're going to be doing is every decision or direction or action that the city manager takes within reason that's outside of his normal authority, but is utilizing this emergency authority, will be done through an emergency order, and those will be numbered and published. So I'm sure we can get you copies of every order as they're signed by Paul, and hopefully before they go to the public, if there's time for that.
Yeah, that would be perfect. And I knew that I'd read that line, Mr. Gabriel, but I just needed to know that we would be receiving in such a time that if somebody from the public asked us what had happened 2 days before, that we'd already have an answer for them. So that should work.
Thank you. Any other discussion on ordinance number 3115-2020? And, Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I just wanted to follow up on Councilmember Next's question a little bit also. I've been trying to keep council up to date as things have changed throughout this situation. And the reality is we haven't even made any real changes since last week, which I'm very pleased about, actually. That the intent of the administration certainly isn't to make a whole bunch of changes once this ordinance passes, assuming it does pass. I'd like to keep things as consistent as possible and as normal as possible and really be deliberate about any changes. So if council was thinking that there might have been changes that have occurred since the last time you'd received an email from me, there has not been any changes that have been made since last week. So like Mr. Bloom said, we will be notifying council immediately upon any action that's taken. Thank you.
And just another point here too is that the state levels come out with the governors come out with, I think we're up to 10 mandates so far that affect our city and would supersede anything that we would do that would be in conflict with what they're doing, or to a lesser restriction, I suppose. As in, last night there was or yesterday evening, the governor issued a mandate that requires self-quarantine for visitors into our state, 14 days. So that could clearly affect some of our residents that we have no control over. That's something that the state has mandated and also associated a fine with it. So again, there's, this is fluid on multiple levels as we move along. So again, I support this. I think it's important that our city manager, since he does do the day-to-day business of the city, have the ability to react to a very fluid, changing situation. And I want to just say I appreciate everybody calling in tonight. What we want to do is try to limit exposure at City Hall here as much as possible. And as a matter of fact, have the city, our offices closed to the public at this time for face-to-face business anyway. But, I just asked as a message for our city residents to, again, practice, all the recommendations of hygiene and social distancing and those sorts of things that will surely slow the spread and flatten the curve which is what we're trying to do. And the way I guess I put it to some people, I've gotten to that point now, not to scare anybody, but just as to put it in the front of their, thought process of how they interact day to day and carry out their day with other people, is just to imagine if they were the last one that didn't have this COVID-19. In other words, anybody they met or ran into was a potential carrier. I think that's sort of not to say I want to scare anybody, but it puts it in perspective of how you should, constantly be aware of, things you do, and make sure you do everything you can to keep yourself and family safe. So with that, I'll ask for any final thoughts or discussion on this. Council? Councilmember Glendenning.
Just want to thank administration for a clear representation of the situation we are in, and the path we're taking. I see primarily the interest of not only our citizens but our employees is paramount in the view of administration, and I appreciate that. Also in the discussion, I see that we are paying attention philosophically to the signal, not the noise. We're focusing on what affects us as a city, as an administration, and as a group of citizens in an area, and thank you for that approach.
Any other discussion from council? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Petty,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Malloy,
Yes.
Councilmember Navar,
Yes.
Councilmember Naxtat,
Yes.
Mayor Gabriel,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterkin,
Yes.
Councilmember Glendenning.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next up, we have public comment. Is there anybody that would like to address the council on this time? Okay, I've just been informed we don't have anybody online, so seeing no other business before this body, we are adjourned.